In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, one God. S praznikom, the joyous feast of our heavenly protector and patron, St. Theodore the Tyro. I was recently reading online about some surveys that had been done of parents of young children, asking them what sort of expectations they had for their children, what hopes and aspirations they had for them. And it asked questions like, by the time your child is 30, what sort of things would you hope that they might have in order for themselves? And there were things like that they be well-traveled, that they be a homeowner, that they have a college degree, that they be in a job that they prefer, they be married, they have children, these sorts of things. And I was kind of surprised by some of the choices, some of the ones that ranked very high. Surprisingly, more people were concerned that their children by the age of 30 be well-traveled than that they be married or have any children. I think that's very telling about our times. But the biggest thing that they were most concerned about, beyond home ownership, beyond college education, though college education likely lent itself to this, was that they be in a good job. 82% of the parents said that they thought it was very important that by the age of 30 their children be in a job that they wanted. And as you went down the survey, it listed the positions that they hoped their kids might be able to obtain. And they were the ones you might expect: a doctor, a lawyer, a business person, maybe a teacher, these sorts of things. And what struck me as I was thinking about it in light of today's celebration is not a single one, and not that I really expected to see this rank high in the list, but not a single one said, I want my child to be a martyr for Christ. But if we think about it, isn't that what we ought to want for ourselves and for our children? Not that our children should have to die a painful death, but that our children and ourselves would be so dedicated to Christ that if that were to come upon us, we would hold true to that confession. We would stand boldly for the sake of Christ in the face of all the things that the world may try to take away from us. So I want to tell you a little bit about the saint we're commemorating today. I know sometimes, even as he's our heavenly patron and a saint that we sing hymns to week after week, we sometimes maybe forget some of the details of his story. St. Theodore was a recent recruit, a conscript. That's what the word Tyro or Tyro that is appended to his name means. He'd recently been drafted into the military, recently signed up. And just after this, the Emperor Maximian, who was one of the most violent persecutors of Christians, reigning around the time of the year 300, just a few centuries after Christ, had just put forth an edict calling for a systematic persecution of the church throughout the entire Roman world. Before this, there had been smaller persecutions that flared up here and there. Maybe a city governor would be upset about the effect that it was having on the trade for the sale of idols, and so therefore the Christians would all be railed in. Or perhaps a large group of people in a certain area would convert and refuse to take part in some of the services, refuse to worship the gods, and there would be a small flare-up of persecution here or there. But other than just a couple decades before this, under the Emperor Diocletian, there had never been a systematic, empire-wide persecution of Christians. Well, it's just at this time that Theodore is enlisted in the military, and the order comes down that every one of the members of his military legion have to go forward and have to offer a sacrifice to the Roman gods or face persecution. And many of his cohort went along with it, even though they themselves were Christians. Many of them said, I'm just going to go along. I'm just going to do what I need to get by. Maybe I don't really mean it. It's just an outward show. But I'm going to do what I can to get by. But St. Theodore knew that he could not do this. He knew that there was no way that he could offer worship to the false gods and to the demons when he was a son of the true God, enlightened and illuminated in the waters of baptism and united to Christ, the very Son of God. And so when his general came to him and ordered that he make the ritual sacrifice that was required of everyone else, He outright refused to do so. And they said, "What do you mean you're not going to do this? You have orders from the emperor to do this." Do you know what his response was, this brilliant young man? He turned to him and said, "I serve one Lord and one King, and he has told me nothing of the sort. I will not serve your gods. I will serve my God alone." Now, he showed great promise, and they were afraid of losing a good soldier, and so they thought, we'll give him some time to come to his senses. So his officer gave him a few days to think things over, gave him some amnesty, and St. Theodore wanted to make it very clear that he was not going to go along with that which they desired. So he went to the temple that they wanted him to go to. But instead of offering incense on the fire to the gods, he turned the fire on the gods and burned the place to the ground. And then when they brought him before the judges and said, "How could you do such a thing? How could you defy our gods?" He mocked them and said, "What are your gods if I can burn them with fire? What sort of gods do you worship if they can be so easily thwarted?" And they began to list for him all that awaited him if he refused to deny Christ and to bow himself before the pagan gods, the tortures, the imprisonment, and death itself. He said, "What can you take from me? Go ahead and do your worst." So they placed him in prison, and they placed him in a solitary cell, and Christ appeared to him and told him, "Do not worry about what might befall you, and don't take any food from them. Keep yourself in fasting now and prepare yourself." And so instead of lamenting, falling into depression, mourning the fact that he was about to die so young, about to give up his promising career, about to give up his life so early, instead he stood in that cell and sang hymns. And the very angels of God joined him there. The guards actually opened the slot to see. They thought perhaps someone had snuck in with him. They didn't know what was going on, and they saw these white-clothed men standing with him. And so when they opened the cell to figure out what was going on, they saw just him standing alone. The very angels were there present with him. Well, finally, they brought him before one last tribunal, and this judge tried to beg him, tried to make a plea deal with him, tried to give him an offer he thought he couldn't refuse. He said, "All you have to do is this. If you renounce this silly confession of yours, if you renounce this faith of yours in this man that was killed by a Roman governor some few centuries ago," this is how they thought of Jesus, "if you will renounce him, we won't only just let you live, we'll make you one of the great high priests of these gods," which at the time there was a lot of money in that. That was a good place in society. That was a gravy train if you could get that. And he mocked them back and said, "Let me tell you one thing. You say, 'Will I stand with Christ?' And I tell you this. I am with Christ, I have been with Christ, and I will forever be with Christ." This too must be our resolve. This too must be what we implant in ourselves and in our children. We must impress upon them, you were born a Christian. You are a Christian. You will die a Christian. Don't let anything in the world tempt you away from that, draw you away from that. Don't let anything or anyone lead you into thinking that there is anything better than Christ to be had. And this is what St. Theodore had resolved. What riches can you give me when all of heaven awaits me? What crowns and honor can you give me when a wreath awaits me if I die victoriously for Christ? What honor can an earthly emperor who will be dead in the grave in a number of years give me when the eternal God himself will say, "Well done, my good and faithful servant," if I stand for him now this day? And so they led him to his death. And like so many of the other martyrs in the early church, they didn't go in weeping and gnashing in teeth and cursing those that were taking them to their death. He went boldly. He knew that the flame that awaited him would be his connection to Christ. And so when they brought him before the pyre where he was to be burned to death, and the soldiers were piling up the wood, they went to tie his hands to throw him in, and he said, don't even bother. He stripped himself of his clothes, and he walked into the fire and willfully gave his soul back to God. What a great and marvelous witness he was. Now, unfortunately, in our day, the word martyr has become a bad word because of a certain other religion that grew out of the East, that certain extremist members of it use this term, and society uses it, of figures that go and carry out acts of terrorism against others. This is not what a martyr is. A martyr, the Greek word martyrios, means someone who bears witness, who confesses a reality. The saints that were martyrs are martyrs of the death of Christ that has trampled down death, and his resurrection that has given life to those who are dead in the tombs. Those who know that Christ has conquered the power of death. And so they go boldly to death because they know death has no sting. Death has no victory. Nothing in this world can have any power over us because Christ has been victorious. Well, St. Theodore's life did not end there that day in the fire. He was taken to heaven. He was glorified among the saints, and he continues to work miracles for those who pray to him. And today, specifically, this first Saturday of Great Lent, we commemorate one of those miracles. Just about 60 years or so after his martyric end, the Roman Empire was a completely different place. Because of his confession and so many others like him, the Roman world had been basically converted to Christianity. The Emperor Constantine became a Christian just a decade later. He legalized Christianity, and in the time to come, it would become the official religion of the Roman world. But one of his descendants, Julian, who had actually been a fellow student with St. Basil the Great in Athens, Julian, who we call the apostate, because he had been born in the church, had been very faithful and taught the theology, but decided to return to the pagan gods and goddesses. Julian, in his effort to corrupt the Christians, carried out a very nasty deed after the first week of Lent in the year 361. In the city of Constantinople, he knew that the Christians had been fasting very strictly that first week, many of them not eating at all, not just switching out their meat for some shellfish or switching out their milk for some soy, not eating at all. And as the end of the week came, he knew that they would be very hungry and they'd be seeking to take some food in that first Saturday and that first Sunday. And so he put forth an order that all the food in the marketplace was to be defiled with the blood of the animals that had been sacrificed to the pagan gods. So that anyone that would go to the market and eat the food that was there offered would be implicitly partaking of the worship of Zeus and Athena and Aphrodite and all the horrible gods and goddesses of the Romans. And the bishop, finding out about this, was dismayed. He didn't know what to do. What would he tell his people? How could they possibly preserve themselves from such defilement? And so he prayed and kept vigil. And you know who appeared to him? Our own St. Theodore. Our own St. Theodore appeared to him in a vision and proclaimed to him that all he needed to do was to have the people eat koliva, which we will have today ourselves. We will bless and partake of. A boiled wheat dish. And through this they would sustain themselves. It wouldn't be all the glorious foods that they might find in the marketplace, but it would be something to hold them up through until they had made it through this great difficulty and trial. Well, brothers and sisters, we too need to be careful because so much in the marketplace of the world around us has been sprinkled with the blood of so many pagan sacrifices. Can we even turn the TV on anymore and not be smeared by so much licentiousness and violence and irritation? Can we send our kids to school and know that they're not going to be smeared with so many pagan and apostate ideas? Can we even just go about our day-to-day interactions sometimes without this? And yet, St. Theodore and St. John, who was the bishop in that day, they stand for us as witnesses that we too must keep ourselves pure. We too must hold up a good confession of the faith. Because as Christ told us today in the gospel, we are to be not of this world. And we are to remember that just as Christ said, if the world has loved me, they will love you. Let's stop and look at the world around us. Does the world around us, does our nation look like it loves Christ and keeps his commandments? I'll leave it to you to answer that. I don't think so myself, though. So the other option is, if they don't love me, if they hate me, they will hate you also. But he says, do not fear. Do not fear those who can ruin your lives here or take away your body here. But fear and love him who can take your soul and who will give you so many things and so much more if you will stand for him. Christ said, if we will confess him before men, he will confess us before his Father in heaven and the very angels. So brothers and sisters, here we are this day. We have made it through the first week of the fast. We are celebrating the memory of our great and holy martyr, the heavenly protector and patron, Theodore the Tyro. Will you say those same words that he did that day when the time comes? When any challenge comes, small or large, that seems to drag you away from Christ? I am with Christ. I have been with Christ, and I will be with Christ. So that loving him and confessing him, we will know that he will confess us in that great and holy day, the fearful day of our judgment. I wish you all good strength in the remainder of the fast that lies ahead, and in all your lives, that you will hold to this great and glorious confession of the faith, and that we may be found worthy to stand someday in the midst of Christ and all his saints with the holy great martyr Theodore and all the rest who praise him throughout all eternity. Amen.